He is a carpenter, sawyer, shoemaker, and cooper. So just looking at that runaway ad or listening to it, it gives you an idea just how multi-skilled enslaved people were. And this is just one. And this would be pretty average if you're looking at runaway ads, particularly associated with enslaved tradespeople. So it's just dispelling that myth that enslaved people, all they were out in the fields, that they weren't multi-skilled. This is saying in black and white, just showing you to just multiple levels of skill that enslaved people period, had, and how much potential profit that they brought to the slaveholder and to the colony period.
Yeah, a lot of the times, one of the things that we have to deal with most in our interpretations, and you all back me up on this if you agree, is dispelling myths or stereotypes about just that these enslaved people, these enslaved humans, are just participating in agriculture.
Right.
80 to 90% of the colony's population is doing agriculture, but there are also all sorts of testaments to the skill level of the working class citizen in Virginia, and especially the enslaved people, doing different sets of tasks as they are growing up, learning,
hey,
but serving an apprenticeship.
Sorry to interrupt.
Yes.
We didn't have any sound when we started.
Okay.
So let's just say something happened and let's start over again.
Oh,
so everybody can hear the ad and everything. So
okay.
Let's introduce yourselves and take it from the top again.
All right.
Thank you, everybody out there watching. Stick with us.
Hey, I'm Adam. Can you hear me now? I'm a carriage driver.
I'm Harold, Apprentice Carpenter.
My name is Ayinde Martin. I'm a journeyman carpenter here at Colonial Williamsburg. And again, this is a discussion on enslaved tradesmen, free and enslaved black tradesmen here in Colonial Virginia, Colonial America for that matter. And our discussion is basically about talking about those individuals, giving more background on the lives and survival techniques of those people. And I believe we may have questions being asked of us while we're doing this. I'm just wondering.
Yeah, and I guess maybe this will create more questions too, is that we like to read from those primary documents that we talked about the last time. And this is actually from the Virginia Gazette newspaper, a runaway ad. And it's dated April 23rd, 1738. One away from the subscriber in Lancaster County, the 17th instant, a dark mulatto fellow named Will. He is a lusty, well-set fellow, aged about 42 years age. He is pretty much pock-fretting and has a lump on the hind part of his leg near his heel. He wore a man's cloth jacket, a pair of brown cotton breeches, and an Osnaburg shirt. He carried with him a cotton fustian jacket, a lopping axe, and a fiddle. He is a carpenter, sawyer, shoemaker, and cooper. So just hearing just those skills, just how many skills that enslaved person had, that's just one enslaved person, just how much money that one individual could bring to a slaveholder. I mean, you heard it. I mean, cooper, carpenter, sawyer, shoemaker. So again, this is just one article, one of runaway ad. This is pretty average if you're looking at runaway ads, particularly if we're talking about tradespeople. So it kind of dispels that myth that enslaved people were just out in the fields, that they weren't multi-skilled, that they didn't have any intellect to think for themselves, whatever the case may be. This is really dispelling that myth in black and white, and the slaveholders' own words. So again, it's important for everybody to get understanding just how much enslaved people contributed to not only the slaveholders, but to the colony as a whole, especially if you're looking at the economy.
Yeah, I enjoy the Peter Debfoot's runaway ad. That might be somewhere on Colonial Williamsburg's website. You can read it for yourself. But the amount of skills that he has, and in the middle of that list of things that people know him about, he's listed as the greatest scytheman, with or without a cradle, in all of America. And that's a lot to be said when we're talking about just the fact that this man's labor is how this man does his labor is how people recognize him, how the quality of his work is how they recognize him.
Yeah, I think he had, what was it, like 7 or 8? I think it was about 7 or 8.
I know he was listed as a sawyer,
He was painter.
joiner.
Right.
So he's doing finished carpentry.
Right.
He might have carted goods too.
Yeah, I think Carter was on there, I think.
Which is so. I don't know much about animal husbandry, which is why.
Swing it to me.
Yeah, there you go.
No, I mean, you know, if you start going, you know, agricultural wise, and then animal like husbandry, you know, the gentleman who's going to be taking care of your horses, 9 times out of 10, when he picks a horse's foot up, you know, he's got to understand the anatomy, the frog, the central sulcus, and everything that's going to pump through that housing upwards of the leg. So I always say he's got some ability to be a veterinarian there as well, because no hoof, no horse. So he's going to be what's keeping that horse alive. Then he's got to understand harness fitting, harness adjustments. He has to understand how to train that animal, you know, to get him to go forward, step off, come to. And typically breeding as well, because a lot of times, just like how masters will, you know, say in regards to all of their property, to get more slaves, you got to breed more. So to get more horses, you know, you breed more horses. So they're understanding, you know, the lineage and the genealogy and the culture of, you know, what they're looking for breed-wise. Driving the roads, because you have to be versatile driving the road, because you can't say, oops, sorry, wrong turn.
Yeah,
so he's understanding the roads and how to navigate. So yeah, you're going to find multiple skills there as well.
I think it's a real good testament to these enslaved individuals as individuals, as individual human beings with not just personalities specific to themselves, because all humans have that. Yeah. And again, that's actually what we want to discuss, is how these individuals, how these people are humans with every bit of intellect and emotion and compassion that we walk around with today. Yeah. Telling that story on a day in and day out basis to groups of people that you may not agree with immediately, but generally you don't know that. So you have to treat them, you know, as you want to be treated. What are the different, give me one challenge of doing that work day in and day out. Not what makes it difficult, well, other than it being hot. Yes, but we're used to it. But what's the main thing that you want to cover? The main thing that you want to get to, that kernel that you want that guest to be able to pop. You know, what do you want to make them understand when they finish?
For me, it's the understanding just how much the impact the institution had, and an impact that Native people, enslaved people had on just making pretty most of this happen. If we're looking at Williamsburg, if we're looking at Virginia as a whole, if we're looking at the prominent founding fathers sorts, or I say Jefferson, Washington types, and see how much the institution impact had on their lives, that's the real thing that I would want folks to get from what we're talking about.
Yeah, I'd say knowing that these people are the foundation for the founding fathers, like Harold said, and then getting to what you said, they're human first, and don't put the shame on the person that's enslaved. Put it on the law and the individuals making that law, the enslaver. Because to me, when you tell me that, okay, this is my destination or plot in life, and then I surpass that, and then you have to make another series of laws to put me back into that, you're telling me how great that I am, how powerful my mind is, and how much of a necessity I am for you and your livelihood.
Yeah, I think my main focus is getting a guest or any person that I speak with, because I don't just talk about this when I'm in these clothes at work at Colonial Williamsburg. Obviously, this skin is still here, so every now and then there's an occasion to discuss the institution of slavery or the residue of it. Right. You know, and my main point that I want to get across to people is that they survived it. You know, to spend 15 to 20 minutes talking to someone and you just talk lashings, you just talk middle passage and tight packing and loose packing, you just talk family separations, you know, you talk the gruesome stuff, the horror story stuff. I don't find a whole lot of times where that person that I spoke with for that amount of time about those topics, I don't find a whole lot of time that they gained anything from it. It may have reinforced some things they believed already, But what I want them to believe is that I'm here because these people survived through this iniquity, this evil, all these dangers that they had to deal with. Just living in the 18th century, free or enslaved, is not something someone from the 21st century is going to be able to accomplish. Living a day in the life of anybody in the 18th century, we'd be through with it. You know?
Yeah, and we shouldn't want to. I mean, like, there's a reason why, those folks persevered and went through what they went through so that we can be in this position to be able to highlight, what it was. And like you said, I mean, we can't, focus solely on one aspect of it because it's several layers to the onion. Mm-hmm. So we've got to peel them back. But, the big struggle is, people that come here, they're not coming, the same way they did 30 years ago where they spent, 7 days in the foundation. So sometimes you've only got, 30 minutes with them at that site.
If that, yes.
So we have to, keep that in mind. And then also, keeping in mind that for a lot of people, this is their first time really being face to face with it.
Yep.
So, and now I'm face to face with you too.
Yes.
So, I mean, that could be intimidating. So
that is something that is I've experienced that where I might have been the first African American person someone has come in contact with, and there's
ta-da.
I will call them challenges.
Yeah.
That you have to deal with anyway, just on a human level. I'll put it this way: I don't want to speak for myself while I'm up here because there are three of us here. Mm-hmm. There's at least three different points of view. It's always been said, black people are not a monolith.
Yeah,
right. We don't speak as such. We don't exist as such. Half of this town was that same way. Right. Every household had their family groupings, and those family groupings included their enslaved people on a document. Mm-hmm. But there's also that practice of human beings being in the same place. They were part of the master's everyday life. So the master understood that human being was a human being. That master understood that person had a point of view, even though it might not be acknowledged until money or the law would become an issue, in which case that person was considered a piece of property.
Yep. You want to see if they got questions for us?
Sure. We've talked enough.
So a question from Christine. She was curious about the presence of free black tradespeople in Williamsburg during the colonial period.
There aren't a whole lot of free black people in Williamsburg, but we know that they are here, which is probably the bigger point. You could be born free, condition of the mother determines the condition of the child. You could be manumitted, which is a legal freedom granted by the governor and the governor's council. Very rarely could someone be purchased, and not legally during the 18th century could someone purchase their freedom. So let's say a free black person or a free mulatto. The difficulty that they have not only is the fact that they are black in this community, and everybody acknowledges that, and all the difficulties that come in with it, but that they want to be paid for their work. If I'm enslaved in the 18th century as a carpenter, my master is getting the money, for my work at least. There are cases where I could get tips or what have you, but that still I won't be able to use those tips to purchase my freedom. Mm-hmm. But more so, the money that is paid for that enslaved person's labor is going to the master of that enslaved person. Free blacks had to deal with that, but they also existed in this economic society.
Yeah, I think there is one or two that I can recall. Is Adam Waterford. I think he was a cooper.
Mm.
Yeah.
He was here, and I think he lived over by, which is today the Lodge area. And I think that's John Rollison. I think he was a shoemaker.
Yeah, he's one of the wealthiest.
Yep. Yeah.
So he owns a couple taverns too towards Gloucester, and it's certain troops that actually write about the quality of the stay that they admired while they were in Gloucester's and in his inn. And
keep in mind too, there wasn't a whole lot of free blacks. I think out of the 900 some odd enslaved people in Williamsburg, I think there's only 11 that were free. It was like 4 free black families. So really, you can literally count them on our hands when we're talking about free blacks. They were really few, far in between. But there's also Matthew Ashby.
Yep.
Yeah.
Too. Some of his jobs you could say could be trades like, but I don't know if he was an actual trade, but he did multiple things. And I think he did a cart or two according to his inventory, and that's where we get an idea of what he maybe what he did to make money. We know he had a wagon and a cart and some horses.
He got paid.
Yeah, he got paid.
He got paid
He
in
got
the
paid.
community.
Right.
I like discussing Lydia Cooper. She was a free mulatto woman who owned her property, owned 2 enslaved people, and she had a business on her own. She was a laundress, but she also rented 2 of her enslaved people out. One that she gained through, I believe, inheritance from her previous husband, and another that she purchases and she rents one of them out to the governor's palace, and another she rents to a boarding house as a laborer there. So free blacks in the community, definitely there. Very few and far in between, and I can go out on a limb and say that everybody in this community knew them.
Yeah.
You know, that's one thing. This city isn't that big to where people wouldn't know who everybody was.
Yeah, and still today.
Yep.
Everybody knows who you are.
Absolutely. And when you think about those free blacks in terms of, you know, the privileges they had in terms of being free, all they could do is legally marry and own property. And then when you look at the property aspect and the law and how it works for them, the law only would go so far because of the fact that, you know, Africans or African Virginians cannot testify against whites in court. If they had legal issues, that's going to be an issue. If you're talking about tradesmen, people who are patronizing their business, and if it's an issue with exchange of money or lack thereof, they wouldn't really be able to take that person, that free white person, to court because of the fact that they were African American. So there's still some limits too on that free black person's lives being free. So it's like they're free, but they're not really free.
And they're really not going to go anywhere either because
Right.
you know the danger is once you leave where people know you, who knows you in North Carolina?
That past doesn't speak up for you as much as
Exactly.
people that know you in society will.
Yeah, who's the girl at St. George Tucker ends up recognizing when she was removed from her family in Norfolk, and he's the one who got her off the auction block because he recognized her. And I mean, if it wasn't for him, she would have been somewhere else.
That's right.
So a few questions come up, and I'll try to sum them up in a certain way. I think a lot of people sometimes don't realize that our tradespeople are not portraying characters. You're you, and you have skills, and you're in costume. How do you deal with it when people come up to you and assume that you're portraying an enslaved person? You know, how do you handle those situations?
If I'm confronted with that, because I also used to do character work here, which is a totally different ball of wax. I asked them. Well, I tell them that I could be a free black person too, if they speak to me as if I'm an enslaved person. Just to break up that sort of box that they're getting ready to put me in. It's like, all right, well, hold on. This is, I can understand what you're asking, but this is where I want to take this discussion with that person. I'm in the 21st century with that person. There are a few of us that grew up working in the foundation, and discussion of the institution of slavery is not out of the ordinary to me. So there's occasions where I speak sort of jaded about it, just because I don't want to say it's second nature, but it's my life. You know, I don't stop. Like I say, I don't just stop discussing this when I leave work. So that the explanation of my job, following archaeologists as they dig up the footprints of buildings and give us research to tell us what types of trees we should be using to make building materials to reconstruct a building in town. Like that's my function in the museum, along with talking about the people that are doing that work, free and enslaved. And honestly, more often than not, I'm discussing the enslaved person. You know, newsflash. So the main thing I want to make sure of is that person isn't upset with my answer after I finish discussing it with them. You know, I want them to be able to gain something from every bit of information that I gave them, because somebody spent the time to research that. So I can't talk about my whole job if I'm speaking to that person as if I'm in character, as if I'm in the 18th century. There's so much other stuff that we have to cover. So it's almost immediate to where I approach them as if I'm in the 21st century. You know, even though the costume is there, but once they walk up and you know start talking, that's when I want to make sure that person understands we are in the same time period. Mm-hmm. Let's speak together about this.
Yeah. It depends on my mood, honestly. So mood has a lot to do with it, and I'm not afraid to say, because some days, we're all human.
Yep.
So sometimes I'll ask a question back to them, because that's always a good way to put the thinking cap on them.
Yeah.
And then the other one, which I like to do, is I tell them, I'm not black. And here it's always, huh? And that's because you're teaching them, okay, so somebody's taught you what it's supposed to look like. And then almost always they usually go, well, you're wearing those clothes.
Yeah.
And then there's a white interpreter, he's got the same thing I've got on.
Yep.
So what did you assume for me that you didn't assume for him? But I don't come aggressive at them, because you don't want to run them off them. You want to bring them to you.
That's true.
And then when you start teaching them about it, and then all of a sudden you start talking about family. Oh, yeah, I got a cousin who looks like you. Yeah, and would you have said that to him? What does he look like? And it goes from there. And then sometimes I think other people, because they meet a colleague prior before they come to you, they think like, okay, yeah, he's going to be, in character because the last guy was. So I'll keep that in my mind, because they may have met somebody, portraying a character. And then you also keep in mind that, okay, how are you coming? Are you coming to try to be funny? And then I let them realize, okay, I can go there with you too, but you might not, have the same equipment that I've got. So we might not both be playing the ball game. So let's keep it, fair and on an educational level, and then go from there. Because once we had that established, yeah, we can go and say, okay, this is what it would have looked like. This is what the law would have said, or I should have looked like, and then go from there. Because like you said, it's based off the status of the mother. So, we know how the genes come out. There's a lot of stuff that looks black that ain't. And that was Williamsburg. Thomas Jefferson calls it Little New Guinea, because you can't tell who these people are. It looks like an HBCU when you walk up and down the street. So.
Yeah, I just say, are you talking? I'll just engage them. Say, are you talking about the enslaved? Sometimes that still don't work. Sometimes we just have to come out and say it, because it's just they have an expectation, and they have a certain desire that they want from us, and so no matter how much we tell them, they still. So what would you been doing?
Same thing you would have.
Right? What was it like? And so I'll just say, yeah, we're not in character. We're in the 21st century, but we're here to engage you and to be able to talk to you honestly about what the institution was, and we can't do that if we're portraying characters. And then sometimes, I'll just say, for me, that would be a hard job to do. For me personally, to portray a character, especially knowing how the public will receive you. So, I give kudos to our actresses folks who deal down on a daily basis, because they can't step out unless it's some extreme reaction to them. So,
which has happened.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, and I say what's up, what's happening too much on the carriage for people that think I'm in character. So.
Yeah, generally by the greeting, they kind of know that we're not in the 18th century.
Yeah, and I think not being in character gives us a bridge to communicate more too.
Yeah.
So speaking of not being in character and obviously talking about your own experiences, both Kimberly and Ken were curious about what drew you to your current jobs. Was it a passion for the skill or the trade, or was it something else?
I was broke. And being serious, Ayinde actually brought me to carriage driving. This will be super duper funny.
Uh-oh.
But remember in the Randolph house, it was super duper slow. And you were talking about, other, things to do in the historic area. And you had mentioned about being a carriage driver one time. And I never thought about it. And I was like, yeah, it might be all right. And then, so, when you thought this little 13-year-old, listen, I was paying attention. And in 2013, I applied for the job twice. I didn't get it the first time. I waited 3 years, reapplied. Didn't get so lucky. The third time was a charm, then I got it. So, yeah, thanks, Ayinde.
No problem. Anytime.
Yeah, that part, like I said, I don't know how difficult it is for others in the trades, but it took me quite a number of years to get into the trades too here. So, it was a kind of hard road, especially when you saw other colleagues getting into the trades that. And it just took so long for some of us to get into the trades as African American. So when you said that, it was just it hit me, because I was like, man, how many times did I apply? How many different positions did I apply for? So yeah, so even the struggle is real. When we talk about the 18th century and even today, and some of the things that we have to encounter. But but still be professional, still do our job. All that has an effect on on you as a person. You really have to have a skin thick as leather to be here, because you're not only dealing with talking about the emotional aspect of history. And some people actually believe that history, you can tell history without emotion. History is emotional.
Yeah.
There's no way you can do that. So, but it's not only what the job that we do that makes it difficult, but it's also the external factors outside of, doing our immediate interpretation that we have to deal with, that, it could break just an average person down, dealing with just everything that, we have to deal with as African American interpreters. Like I said, well, it's both on the job, but, directly dealing with guests and then dealing with, maybe like some of our colleagues and their reactions to us, are just trying to get ahead. So it's kind of interesting. But we're still here.
I'm thinking I've been here for 20 plus years. Yeah, that's a good number. I grew up working in the foundation, and this ended up joining the historic trades carpentry crew was sort of a natural progression for me. I had the opportunity to be a junior interpreter here, working at Carter's Grove and the Benjamin Powell House and other sites around town, doing evening programs. Came back after high school, started doing tours in buildings. First building I gave tours in was the Governor's Palace, which is a culture shock for myself and the first group of guests I talked to in that building. Yep. And the whole while I'm walking through buildings that I knew were original, and I knew who built them. And so now I got to do the same things that they did. I like telling people that every building in the historic area had an enslaved person's hands on some way, shape, or form if it's an original building. And if it's the 20th century buildings that are constructed, 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, there's black hands that are related to those enslaved hands who constructed the buildings around town. So moving into the carpentry crew was a sort of a natural progression for me. And it gave me something constructive to do with my hands.
So, talking about your own experiences here, Harold, you're an apprentice and moving through a curriculum. And you did that, and you're a journeyman. Adam, you obviously received serious training in order to handle animals and drive a carriage. Do we see terms like apprentice and journeyman applied to enslaved people in the 18th century? Sean was wondering this, or are they simply described as being skilled?
You see all facets of that.
Right.
I think the best testament is again looking at runaway ads and how many different actual trades are listed on somebody's runaway ad as an identifiable thing. There's no enslaved person walking around with an ID with an ID card saying this is who I belong to, all that sort of stuff. Mm-hmm. But because of the skill that person might be displaying with the work that they're doing, that would be an identifiable factor. There aren't a whole lot of enslaved people's names on classical apprenticeship contracts. But there are almost always enslaved people training with people who have their names listed on apprenticeship contracts. Right. A lot of the education that an enslaved person will gain comes from watching other people doing the work. But it also comes from classical education. Jefferson hires people to come teach his slaves how to do different work around his house, around Monticello. There are joiners that are coming from Scotland, if I'm not mistaken, to educate some of his slaves on how to do interior carpentry, interior work, joinery work. So yes, as much as it is listed, there are times where it's not listed, but it is acknowledged. I guess that's the bigger thing, is it is acknowledged by free and enslaved, that person's skill set.
Yeah, we debate about it a bit because of the fact that an enslaved person would be a journeyman with their skills, but because they wouldn't be necessarily recognized by law legally as journeymen, because they would, if that was the case, they'd be able to hire their own services. Someone owns them. So they're a journeyman in the sense of the skills, but they're not a journeyman in the sense of the entire, I guess, the privileges that comes with becoming a journeyman, being able to hire their own skills. So it's like they're like in that, it's like an in between yeah, a journeyman, but not being a journeyman. So it's kind of, and that's going to be common with a lot of enslaved people, kind of like in that in between of having that skill, just like enslaved people who are going to be masters at their trade, but never be called, or probably never be called a master, but could run a shop or whatever the case may be.
And did run shops.
Right,
Yeah.
right,
Yeah.
exactly right.
So we've talked about runaway ads a bit, and have talked about a couple of specific ones. What do you find are some of the other really good sources to learn about enslaved tradespeople from the past? And so where are places that people can look to learn more?
There's a few books I can think of. Look at Thomas Jefferson's farm book. That gives you a good insight into what was going on at Monticello. I know there are volumes of Washington's correspondence that gives you an idea of what's going on at Mount Vernon and his other rental properties, and the plantations that he was managing for his wife and his wife's children. I think that's a good start. I also mentioned this before. There's a book called Jefferson's Isaac from Monticello to Petersburg. And it was a gentleman named, I don't forget his first name, his last name was Campbell, that actually documented Isaac's life. And Isaac was an enslaved tradesman. I think he was a tinsmith and a tinsmith and blacksmith. And when he was free, he ended up in Petersburg, and that's where this gentleman Campbell found him and pretty much recorded his life. And Isaac gives a real good insight into Monticello and the other plantations and families surrounding Monticello. He had a pretty vivid account. So I think that's just a start.
Yeah, and, you can use JSTOR. That's really good. There's autobiographies where you'll get, some of these people like Martin Hemmings, they'll write, their own autobiographies down, and that's coming from their words, so you're getting it from their mouth and nobody who's, adding to it or taking it away. And then it sounds bad, but obituaries, when there are, obituaries that you can find of them, because then you'll see where somebody else has written about the things that they've done as well. And so I'll use those. And then, of course, like your colleagues are great sources, for it too. So people like, Felix, Joe Jones that have come before us, Mr. Willie Parker, they've left behind, research that they found, when they took the jobs as, tradesmen before we got here. So kind of being those setting stones. And a lot of that's, right in our publications and our records. So we can go to, the Tucker House and find it. So.
As you look at objects and buildings, impressive things built by enslaved hands, or read about excellent actions undertaken by enslaved people, how do you find a balance between, or is there a way to, between honoring that really good work that endures and without honoring the system of slavery itself?
Tell the truth. I think that's the easiest way. Tell the truth. You tell the truth. I mean, not everybody that's white in the 18th century, thought the same, felt the same. And a lot of times when we're taking accounts, you're taking it from the head of the household, the man. Right. So you leave out the wife and everyone else. And then just be real about it. You had some parts of it where, it's like, wow, this is probably going to be difficult, but it still needs to be said, still needs to be told. And then, like you said, talk about how they overcame it, but you have to tell the truth about it, and you can't run from it, because running from it makes you look worse. You have to take it head on and acknowledge what happened, acknowledge what, was a continual, like slavery by another name, when it goes into Jim Crow, but also show that, okay, this is why, you needed to perpetuate that system, because of the skill, because of, the way of living that the slave labor, that free labor afforded those individuals. So don't tell me, the Jefferson's wolf by the ears quote without giving me all of it. And telling me, it's social injustice on one hand and self-preservation on the other. Right. He knows the difference, and he understands, okay, if I let him go, this is what happens. But also, man, I like the way I'm living. So, I mean, don't put Jefferson as a fairy tale superhero and diminish, the folks, that he owns.
I think we have to use a normalcy when we discuss the institution. The numbers thing, 52.4% of Williamsburg is black. in the 1770s, mostly enslaved, but there are a few free blacks as well. This is everyday life to those individuals. So it is sort of our responsibility to speak of it as such. Let's say, hypothetically, I am enslaved in the 18th century. A guest comes from, the future and comes back and looks at me. You're a slave. Yes. Like this is my reality.
Yeah.
This is what I do in this reality I exist in. Again, the best thing I can say to people is 88 original buildings, and it was enslaved hands working on those buildings. It's 200 some odd years later, and they're still standing. There's no better testament for me to talk about not only the skill of those individuals, but even in some original buildings, finding carving from people that were laboring on that building.
Yeah.
Just like children will scribe on a desk or stick gum up under a desk in school or whatnot. That stuff is going on in the 18th century. It's human nature to leave your mark where you were. And these enslaved people did that, just as much as working class whites did.
Yeah, I think it's just like Adam said, tell the truth. And that's why I stress so much those primary documents, because it's what they said, and going to those primary documents and telling that story from the documents. You don't need any other support other than that, because it's what they wrote and what they said. And sometimes that's hard for some people to hear, but you can't dispute it if they wrote it.
Yeah, you see the list of names on the inventory with a monetary value next to their name, and you ask somebody who has a child with them, how much would you value your child if someone would try to purchase them? That's not a question any parent wants to ask, but that's a question that every enslaved parent in the 18th century had to deal with, or at least acknowledge could happen.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Time for one final question. You've all been doing this for a while, standing between the past and the present public and telling these stories. During your careers here, has your perception and interpretation of enslaved people changed? How so?
That's a good one.
Yeah, it changed a bit over time, but every day the immense strength, that they had just to get through a day, a month, a year. A lifetime of having somebody just have complete and total dominion over them, and somehow they still found a way to smile. And I think about, what we go through today. I see that as a small bit of what they went through. You know what I'm saying? Because we can go home at the end of the day. We can leave the job at the end of the day. They couldn't, and somehow they found a way to make it. And that gives me kind of motivation to keep going. And it's just like what I was saying about applying for, trying to get into the trades. I just kept applying, even though, it was disappointing. I just kept going. So it's like sometimes their strength of survival and making it, feeds me to keep going and keep fighting, even when we're exhausted, to keep telling the story, even when we're exhausted. And I think most or many that are listening to this can understand that, especially today in today's days and times, it's exhausting. I know I'm exhausted, but we gotta keep we gotta keep living. We gotta keep living.
I don't know if I thought anything different when I started working here at Colonial Williamsburg. I was 11, which is a long time ago. Not as long as anybody wants to make it, but it's a long time ago. And I grew up in Hampton. I already knew the importance of the year 1619 and what that meant to my hometown. But getting the rest of the story, not just the Civil War story, but getting the revolutionary story in between that first contact, that first landing, and Civil War era history that you get a lot of in Hampton. Colonial Williamsburg gave me the opportunity to look at original documents, to see actual houses that people lived in, to step in their footsteps, and that wasn't always the case where I grew up. My perception of those people was always that they were human beings. So it only strengthened the want to tell their story accurately and is as positive a light as I could put their struggle in, you know, making sure that people understood the survival techniques, making sure people understood, you know, the quote unquote playing dumb, you know, the fact that that mother, that enslaved mother, is raising not only her children, but she's also raising the master's children. You know, those sorts of things, they only got more important to me over time, being an employee here. And again, like I say, a lot of that started off when I was a child working here. So it was by the time I became an adult and doing tours through buildings, it helped a lot. But I don't think it ever changed my perspective as much.
Yeah, I think it just enriches it. Yeah, I think that you just start to see just how powerful, you know, they were as a people, and then like you see the culture, the commitment, the consistency, and that to me, like you said, that's all I need to be able to get up and come to work and do my job and tell it. Because if they could do it without the reward that we're able to reap and benefit, I got no problem coming here and, you know, sitting on a carriage. And
in
telling,
the heat.
Yeah, exactly. and being able to do my job, my due diligence, you know, for them.
Since I said that was the last question, I'm going to ask another question.
No, we're here. We get paid by the word, don't we?
To share your insight in interpreting these issues for so long, what can Colonial Williamsburg and other institutions like this do to better tell the stories of all of earlier America?
We
be proactive.
Yeah,
Let's not wait for it. Don't wait for it to come to your door. Yeah. That would be my big things. Be proactive, because when you start being reactive, it never. It's almost like in a fight. You start trying to react to the punch, and you swing wide, and you miss, and you get hit again. So be proactive to it, and don't be afraid to, you know, step out and, you know, okay, put yourself on the ledge, and okay, I made myself look bad that time. All right, but who didn't do it? Because that person who said, oh, well, you did that. Well, I didn't see you do it either. So I give you the credit for stepping out and being, you know, forthcoming. And don't say, oh, we're the most, you know, forward in this field, when you look around and it's like, yeah, but the other museums aren't really doing it either. So, you know, one person puts out 2 programs and you say, we've got the most, that's not really impressing me, and it's not going to impress the general public, because they're watching us to see what we're doing. Right. When people think we aren't being watched, we're being watched all the time. And in this world that we're in right now, the 50s, 60s, 70s mindset that you had, when you've got Google and social media and ways for people to watch you all the time and every move, you've got to be about it. You can't just half-step. It has to be there. And they're going to be able to tell when you got the commitment. So I would say be proactive first.
I think from an administrator's point of view, especially if you have like a committee or something like that, the committee's got to be diverse. So you get multiple opinions on how to approach something, and I think sometimes that's lacking. So sometimes it's coming from their experience and their thought process in terms of how to run a museum might be a little marginal, because of the fact that they're not, you know, they're missing some of the story or how to tell it. So I think that's very, very important, to really seek to diversify a committee or whatever, a board of trustees or whoever is running the museum, because in essence, they're the ones who are setting how our museum is going to move forward, you know, what they're going to focus on. I think that's the start there, start the administration and then work your way down in terms of really telling the story, and try, you know, your best to diversify, because varying opinions will really help to give a more holistic understanding of, or let's say a holistic story of the American experience. And I think that's sometimes lacking, so people are missed. You know, if you're talking about women's story or the Native story or African story, others' story in there, that you know, more areas will be covered if you have a diverse group of people that are giving their input in the idea of history.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and say we need to have more Black people apply to work here, and make sure that they understand that this is a difficult job, but it is everybody's responsibility. You know,
it's a job worth doing.
There are 3 of us sitting here, and I'm gonna say this in front of you. I could probably name every African American person that is an employee in costume walking around the historic area right now. And I'm ashamed of a few things in life. But that's one of them that I know every black person that works here. And we want to tell this story accurately. Over half of the town is black, mostly enslaved. It is a small city, but not everybody knew everybody first name basis, but that's what I'd like to change. I'd like to make it so more African American people want to become employees of Colonial Williamsburg and tell this story, help us tell this story. Not just because it's a rich story and because it's important, but because it is important to them to want to tell that story.
Yeah, and use the community. Like, the community is here and it's around us, so we can't use the excuse we can't find people. Right. So Women Mary's right down the street, Carver's Garden, Highland Park. You've got the community right here. So, like, we can't use the excuse of, we don't know how to get them. That doesn't work. So you have to go out there and, shake hands. You knock on the door. If they don't open the door, that's okay. Tell them, hey, I'll come back tomorrow. I'm sorry I missed you today. Mm-hmm. But go out there and make your presence, because there's a lot of misconception, too, still about what Colonial Williamsburg is. Absolutely. And that's black and white. Mm-hmm. And that's not even including going to, Chickahominy, Pamunkey, Charles City, Virginia. So there's still a lot of misconception, and we have to do the job to let people understand and know what we are, what we aren't, and what we're trying to become. So like Ayinde said, we shouldn't always, like, when we find out there's a new black person, he'd be like, hold on, let me go, right?
Exactly.
I need to go find them.
Yeah.
That
Make
should
sure
be
he
it,
already
right?
is.
Yeah. It should be, oh man. So, but yeah, that's a very real thing, like, for us that Ayinde brought up, like, and that we can't allow that to be the culture anymore. So.
Yeah, and I think that marketing part is very important too, because you draw people to with showing the diversity of your story. I think that's important to do too, and focus on. When you're putting out advertisements, whatever it may be, social media, radio, TV, to show that diversity so people actually see that their part of the story is being told. And I think that's really important too, if we're talking about, for museums to do a better job. That would be, I think that would be a great start too.
Harold, Ayinde, Adam, thank you so much for doing what you do and taking your time to talk with everybody. Everybody out there is watching. Thank you for your questions and your encouragement. We're also, of course, always grateful for the generosity of all of our donors. To learn how you can support programs like this, please follow the link pinned to the comments below or visit us at colonialwilliamsburg.org. Do you gentlemen have any final thoughts for folks?
Hey, Mom.
Yeah, I'm on.
Thanks for watching.
Come see us soon.
Yeah.